Good evening, I'm Saraya Mia and this is AWANI Tonight. Khairi Jamaluddin announces task force to oversee bullying in hospitals. And how does interest rate hike impact the property market? That's coming up. The health minister is determined to eradicate toxic work culture in all government hospitals. In a tweet, Khairi Jamaluddin said the work environment in the past and present is different. He wants mutual respect and support among colleagues to be created and not an environment that is abusive and humiliating. He tweeted that following a visit to Hospital Selayang and heard directly from housemen about their work experiences. On April 17, a 25-year-old houseman fell to his death from his residential unit 3 weeks after being posted to Penang Hospital. The issue has been linked to a bullying culture at the hospital. In light of this, the Health Ministry announced the Independent Healthcare Work Culture Improvement Task Force. Headed by former MOSTI Sekjen, Datuk Dr. Siti Hamisah Tapsir, it aims to ensure positive and professional work culture in the health sector.
According to a press release today, the task force would run in-depth analysis on working culture and employment management for healthcare professionals. The study parameters, among others, include the total time and burden of work, sites for making complaints, training and development programs, and performance evaluation. Here is the list of the members of the task force. The members will also be responsible to call and question those allegedly involved in bullying cases, which then would be evaluated by MOH personnel. Additionally, they would be required to prepare reports and suggestions on how to better work culture in the Malaysian healthcare industry.
MOH says it will take a closer look at the culture of bullying in hospitals after the death of a junior doctor recently. Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests how to address bullying among medical professionals. That's coming up right after AWANI Tonight. Meanwhile, the Attorney General's Chambers today clarified that it did not pursue criminal proceedings against Serba Dynamic to avoid economic consequences. In a statement, Attorney General Tan Sri Idrus Harun said the company is slapped with winding up petitions from their creditors, which could jeopardize the livelihood of the company's staff and the interests of shareholders and other creditors.
In these circumstances, he said, the AGC finds that compounding the offences is an adequate form of punishment for the alleged offences. Therefore, AGC is of the view that public interest would be better served by compounding the offences allegedly committed by Serba Dynamic and its executives. By compounding the offences, the need for punitive action against the company is immediately achieved without going through a lengthy trial. Earlier today, Serba Dynamic and 4 executives were acquitted by the Sessions Court after they settled compounds amounting to 16 million ringgit. Last year, the 4 had claimed trial to charges of submitting false statements to Bursa Malaysia under the Capital Markets and Services Act. Malaysian Bar had earlier criticized the decision to merely issue compounds towards Serba Dynamic as too lenient and sets a dangerous precedent.
The Malaysian economy grew 5% in the first quarter of 2022, mainly supported by improving domestic demand as the country eased its containment measures. The figure was higher compared to a contraction of 0.5% in the same quarter of last year.
The figure was also higher than the 3.6% growth recorded in the fourth quarter of 2021. Chief Statistician Datuk Sri Dr. Muhammad Uzair Mahidin said the positive GDP performance was mainly driven by growth in the services, manufacturing and agriculture sectors. Bank Negara Malaysia Governor Tan Sri Nur Shamsiah said the domestic economy is expected to improve further this year, with growth projected at 5.3% to 6.3%. However, weaker than expected global growth, geopolitical conflicts and worsening supply chain disruptions remain as risks.
The Malaysian government and the United States Department of Customs and Border Protection, USCBP, will set up a working committee to address the issue of forced labor in the country. Human Resources Minister Datuk Sri M. Saravanan said The committee would meet every 3 months to exchange information and formulate policies.
Saravanan said the US CBP will also undertake a working visit to Malaysia at the end of the month and hold a workshop with the country's industry players. He said the workshop is aimed at educating industry players on the elements of forced labors to avoid so that their products will not be banned from entering the United States market. Saravanan, who is currently on a working visit to Washington, D.C., said he has met with relevant agencies to discuss his ministry's initiatives to address forced labor indicators such as retention of identity documents, excessive overtime, and withholding of wages.
Local banks are revising their reference rates following Bank Negara's surprise move to raise the overnight policy rate by 25 basis points to 2%. Will higher costs of borrowing dampen sentiment of home buyers? Here with us is Shalindra Nadan from iProperty to talk about the rate hike's implications to the real estate sector.
When it comes to home loan products, the increase has a direct influence for both the base rate and the base lending rate. Especially, this usually rises in tandem when the OPR is raised. So specifically, the two sectors I would say that will be impacted is firstly the property seekers. It will be now more expensive to apply for a home loan because of the higher interest rates. And if you notice, some of the banks, especially local banks, have already announced that they will be revising their lending rates. For home owners with an existing loan, for example, they will also have to pay higher monthly installments. If they opt to pay the same installments, that means their loan tenure will increase. So either way, there is an impact to existing home owners as well. Nevertheless, purchasing property, as you know, is a long-term financial commitment. So even though we see an increase in the OPR, it might not actually deter or stop property seekers from buying or purchasing a property, especially if they have the financial capability to service those loans for the next 25 or 30 years.
Shilendra views that a measured and gradual rate hike will be supportive of economic recovery.
A progressive rise in the OPR will accommodate the country's broader economic recovery plan, right? Given the transition towards an endemic stage with regards to COVID-19 and the latest relaxation by the government in terms of the travel measures and also the expected consumer spending growth in 2022, this is a welcome decision. But we also have to remember that the OPR was at 3% before the pandemic. Now that we are riding out the pandemic, it's only natural that we slowly begin to move back to these base figures as economic conditions improve.
We'll be right back after the break. Stay with us.
Insan yang berjaya juga insan seperti kita. Didorong ke azaman demi mencapai cita-cita mereka. Super. Melengkapkan juadah anda.
Melindungi anda dan seisi keluarga dalam ruang tertutup. Panasonic.
Welcome back. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob met with the United States President Joe Biden and ASEAN leaders at the White House today. Speaking from Washington, he urged the U.S. to adopt a more active trade and investment agenda with ASEAN.
He said by doing so, it will benefit the U.S. economically and strategically. The U.S. was ASEAN's largest foreign direct investor and second largest trading partner with two-way trade of $308.9 billion in 2020. The Prime Minister and ASEAN leaders are in the U.S. for a two-day ASEAN-U.S. special summit starting Thursday.
On the foreign front, Sri Lanka has appointed a new Prime Minister, but that has failed to appease anti-government protesters demanding the resignation of the president, blamed for the country's disastrous economic crisis. Opposition leader Ranil Wickremesinghe was sworn in as PM on Thursday evening, but he's struggling to forge a unity government after senior opposition figure refused to helm the finance ministry. The 73-year-old insists he has enough support to govern and has approached several potential allies to join his administration. But lawmaker Harsha De Silva from country's largest opposition group publicly rejected an overture to take charge of the finance ministry and said he would instead push for the government's resignation. De Silva said he was joining the people's struggle to topple President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and would not support any political settlement that left the leader in place. Sri Lanka's protesters, too, vowed to continue their anti-government campaign despite a new PM at the helm. Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters marched towards the Election Commission in the Philippines, decrying Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s win in the presidential election. They also demanded the polling body explain irregularities in the election, particularly the speed of the transmission of votes to the commission. Protesters claimed thousands of vote counting machines experienced glitches and malfunctions during the election on Monday.
Unofficial results show Ferdinand Marcos Jr. clinched a landslide victory with more than 31.1 million votes in what's projected to be one of the strongest mandates for a Philippine president in decades. His win caps the return of the Marcos family to the presidential palace nearly 40 years after his dictator father was ousted by a people uprising.
31 million votes does not erase what happened during the dark years of martial law. It does not erase the crimes of the dictatorship, the plunder that the Marcos family committed. It only goes to show how deeply problematic our political institutions are, our political system is. And no thanks to social media platforms who did nothing to stop the disinformation from spreading during the last 6 years.
His running mate, Sara Duterte, also won the vice presidential race by a wide margin. They will take office on June 30th after the results are confirmed by the country's Congress.
In other news, the first war crime trial of Russian soldiers since the start of the war in Ukraine opened in Kiev today. A 21-year-old captured member of a tank unit is accused of shooting to death a civilian during the first week of Russia's invasion. Scores of journalists were packed inside a small courtroom where the suspect appeared in a small glass cage. Sergeant Vadim Shishimarin stands accused of shooting a 62-year-old man in the head in the northeastern village of Chupakivka. He faces up to life in prison if found guilty. The case is of huge symbolic importance for Ukraine. The Kiev government has accused Russia of atrocities against civilians during the invasion and said it has identified more than 10,000 possible war crimes. Now, North Korea has confirmed its first death from COVID-19, with tens of thousands more experiencing fever symptoms. State media reported that 6 people died after suffering a fever, with one testing positive for Omicron.
Experts believe the virus has been present in the country for some time. The authorities only announced the first case of Omicron in Pyongyang on Thursday. But in an update on Friday, the official KCNA news agency reported that a fever outbreak had extended beyond the capital since late April. It added that around 350,000 people had shown signs of that fever without specifying how many had tested positive for COVID. North Korea's population of 25 million is vulnerable due to the lack of vaccination program and poor health care.
That's all for you on the show tonight. My name is Saraya Mia. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon.